This is the video lecture for Chapter 9, Planning for Entrepreneurs. I think if you had asked most people what activities are associated with entrepreneurship, writing a business plan is going to be on the list. However, that activity is not, in reality, always what entrepreneurs do. One study in 1989 of successful entrepreneurs on the Inc. 5000 list found that 41% did not have a plan before they launched their business. 26% had a back-of-napkin plan. 5% had financial projections that they had done for investors. Only 28% had written a business plan. That amount seems consistent with other studies of successful entrepreneurs that found 40%, 35%, 30% of successful entrepreneurs wrote a business plan before they started their business. That suggests that a business plan may not always be valuable to an entrepreneur. We're going to talk about why, but there are some advantages to doing so. A business plan, for example, helps attract resources from investors, from other partners that may be valuable to a startup. In reality, as the chapter talks about, it's really banks today that are really asking for a business plan. And banks, as we'll learn when we get into how to finance a firm, are really risk averse. They won't lend money to a startup unless there's proof that there's sales. Well, for brand new startups, sales may be far in the future, and yet they still need resources. And so there are other means by which entrepreneurs can communicate what they're doing besides a business plan. So a business plan may not be the first thing that an entrepreneur does. However, planning in general can be a useful exercise in some form for an entrepreneur. It can, for example, help refine, clarify, crystallize, or organize an entrepreneur's thinking to help them recognize how to organize, how to structure the business for success. It also, going through this effort, requires that the entrepreneur master operational and competitive understanding that can be very useful for the entrepreneur to recognize how to best position and strategize to be successful for the business. That mastery is going to be vital as well in convincing other investors and partners that the entrepreneur or the entrepreneurial team knows what they're doing. Further, it's a call to action. Going through that process, you recognize what has to happen, and it gives some parameters and guidelines by which the entrepreneur can follow to be successful. Another thing to consider about a business plan is that it's probably obsolete when it's finished, because markets and customers change, and plans and understanding of industry and competitors are always evolving. Therefore, a plan is dynamic. It's a living document. For it to be effective, it constantly needs to be updated. The chapter discusses different types of plan, from a back of napkin, just some sketches and some rough ideas, to a business model canvas that we talked about in Chapter 8, to a business brief and a feasibility study. Aspects of those that are shared in Chapter 9 are going to be a part of the final project that you will do for your idea. A pitch deck is a form of a business plan that is orally delivered in front of an investor. And then there's the business plan. What's the appropriate thing to do is going to depend on your audience. As I said, a business plan, a formal business plan, is likely for banks and investors, whereas business model canvas to a pitch deck are going to be more appropriate for investors or early team members, advisors, as you're trying to communicate your idea and get early investment. There's also, once you have a business plan, there's different types of business plans. There's a summary business plan that could be anywhere, it says 10 to 15 pages here, but anywhere from 2 to 10. There's a full business plan, which tends to be 25 to 35 pages. And then there's an operational plan, which can be quite lengthy, that spells out standard operating procedures and the plan for that for a new business. I tend to find that investors and even loan officers and banks prefer less. You think about these investors and other people who are reviewing businesses and business plans, they see a lot of these and they're interested in not having big, long, in-depth plans. They want to understand what's going on and make a judgment. So really, in writing business plans, less is more. As I talked about, the trend today is kind of moving more away from business plans and moving towards pitch decks, which are an abbreviated business plan in a PowerPoint that you often give in a 15-minute presentation. Here's an example of a pitch deck template, and we're going to talk more about this in chapter 16, but it really is becoming the way to communicate with investors. Even before you have the opportunity to present a pitch deck, you have to convince an investor to give you a meeting where you can come and present that. And so that oftentimes requires a pitch, a short pitch, to arrange and attract that meeting later on. And so there's another key kind of skill that an entrepreneur needs to cultivate, is being able to pitch their product. In entrepreneurship, this is often called an elevator pitch, due to the fact that an entrepreneur sometimes will only have an elevator ride, the length of an elevator ride, from the ground floor to the 30th floor where the executive or the investor's office is. And so elevator pitches tend to be short pitches to try to attract interest and attention from a resource holder, investor, or some other partner. And typically they're between a minute to 2 minutes. And there's some technique that goes along with this. There's some guidelines of how to do it. And this can be broken up into smaller segments. For example, if you don't have a lot of time, a 30-second pitch, there are those who suggest if you only got 30 seconds, first tell them what problem you're trying to solve, and then briefly what your solution is. In 30 seconds, each of these really have to be a sentence long. Then how big is your market, and where are you in the journey, and where do you aim to go? That could be a good start 30-second pitch to try to hopefully get a little longer conversation with a resource holder. If you have more than 30 seconds, 2 minutes, for example, do your 30-second pitch, then expand upon that, talking about what is unique about your business. What is it that no one else is doing or no one else understands but you do? Then talk about how are you going to make money? What's your revenue model? That's talked about, a key aspect of the business model, talked about in chapter 8, and specifically in chapter 10 when we talk about the revenue model. Finally, your team. Who have you surrounded yourself with, and how do they contribute to your effort to be successful? And then finally, how much do you need? That's oftentimes why you're pitching, is to try to get financial resources. So what do you need? How are you going to use that money? Good template for a quick pitch that hopefully leads to a pitch deck presentation later on. So for those who do write a business plan, what should be included in it? The textbook talks about this, and I give a few this is just kind of an outline of what sections should be included in a business plan. You should have a cover page, title and table of contents, executive summary, which is usually about 1 to 2 pages of a business plan in miniature. You give a company overview or description. You talk about the industry and competitive situation, your target market and its size. How are you going to market this to the target market? what's your management team, what's your operational plan, what's the milestones that you plan to hit, and what's your long-term strategy. Do you plan to exit? Is this something you plan to keep? Would be a good thing to address. What are the risks? The textbook addresses this. Sometimes entrepreneurs want to avoid talking about risk, but this actually can be a good thing, as it signals that you are aware of the roadblocks, and it suggests that you know what could go wrong, and consequently there's greater confidence that you know how to manage that. And the financial plan, and an appendix, which would include any extra material that supports your points in the rest of the business plan. So this is kind of a typical outline. What do you think is the most important section of a business plan? Think about that. And really the answer to that is the most important sections are those that get read the most, because that's going to have the biggest influence in attracting interest in your endeavor. So it goes to show that the most important sections are the executive summary. Someone who's reviewing your business plan and doesn't have a lot of time, they're going to go there and try to get a sense of what you do. And then the financial plan. A lot of the people who would read these plans are bankers or investors, and the financial plan tells your story in numbers, and that's going to be very important for them to review. And finally, the next part is your management plan, and in particular your team. Who are the people? And the investors are going to be asking themselves, do they have confidence based on your team that you can actually execute on this plan? So it's those three that are really the vital sections of a business plan. Some rules of thumb when you're writing a business plan: it really is less is more. I like these quotes about the power of brevity. Less is more. I like this by Mark Twain, this quote that to be brief sometimes can take a lot more time in preparing to identify what is the most important thing you can say. If you only have a few minutes, seconds, pages to make an impression, what needs to be there? And so it does take time and effort, and that's one argument against doing a business plan, I guess, is entrepreneurs should be investing their time in actually starting the business instead of writing a plan. But if you do write a plan, some rules of thumb are: you want to write to capture attention, avoid jargon, superlatives, empty statements, use repetition effectively to really hit your points, stay on message. Also ensure that there's consistency throughout your plan, meaning that you don't have something in your financial statements that is opposite of what is in your plan. You want to make sure there's consistency. Also, be direct, remove the fluff, be realistic, be conservative in your financial projections. Use good sentence structure, logically support your arguments. You're there to inform, not necessarily to entertain. Proofread it. If there are errors in punctuation or other problems, that's going to send a signal to the reader. And if they're going to say, if the entrepreneur, the writer of this didn't care enough to check for typos, then why should I take the time to read it? So those things are very important. Let me show you an example of what a business plan looks like. And here's one kind of plan: table of contents. You have an executive summary. Business plan writing is single space, but you want to use white space effectively. So numbering, using bullet points, dropping in visuals like graphs, subheadings and headings are going to be really useful to kind of make this accessible to the reader. So we'll scroll through this. You can kind of get a sense. Bullet points are very important. Tables. Here are the milestones. When you're talking about financials, instead of writing those out, using graphs. This is kind of typical boulder point kind of a business plan. you would put kind of the detailed financial statements in the appendix. So let's talk about, if an entrepreneur is going to write a business plan, when should they write it? The textbook talks about this, but there definitely is kind of a time when this would be appropriate, in my opinion. First step would be idea generation, and then creating a business model canvas, and then doing studies, feasibility studies, trying to find validation on the idea and canvas through customer interviews. At that point, an entrepreneur is ready to create a pitch deck. It's only later on, when the entrepreneur has the knowledge and understanding about what the business needs to do and how they are going to be successful, is the entrepreneur ready to write a business plan. And like I said, really, that's sometimes writing a business plan is when that happens is when they need money from an investor or a bank. And so that sometimes is, they're not really eligible for that until later on in their journey. And so a business plan should come later. There's controversy about what's most important, a business model or business plan. I think both are. I think they just are at different stages in the process. A business model needs to be created and validated earlier before a business plan. So that's kind of Chapter 9, and we'll continue talking about these and the revenue model with Chapter 10. Thank you.